Come back to an Infinity N5 initial reaction, this time for Vanilla Nomads. The Vanilla factions have all had pretty significant reworks going into N5, with many of them being sort of on the upper echelons of power moving out of N4. Vanilla Nomads especially was up there with Vanilla combined as one of the stronger Vanilla factions, and generally considered one of the stronger factions in the game. They had a lot of hacking potential, some good guns, and some great toolbox units. But before we jump into N5, let's find out where we're coming from. And a disclaimer, I played a very little bit of Vanilla Nomads in N4, but I myself generally don't really consider myself a vanilla player. I very much enjoy the fantasy and play style of the sectorial factions, but with the way vanillas are starting to go now, I'm sort of becoming more interested in Vanilla Nomads. I've used most or all of the units in Vanilla Nomads and consider myself pretty familiar with the theory behind Nomads itself, but if I miss anything, get anything wrong, or you have a take, please leave it down in the comments. I'd be really interested to see what you guys are thinking regarding Vanilla Nomads. So what defines Vanilla Nomads? They've got a very strong toolbox approach to list building, being able to take generally one of everything they need in order to fulfill the mission and then a bit more. They've got hacking superiority with very high quality and cost-efficient hackers, and a pretty fantastic repeater net, at least coming from N4 with turn 0 repeater nets, pitchers, fast pandas, and the works. They've got pretty strong guns and tags and other select units like the Intruder. Generally, when you think about Nomads, you might think about them not being able to shoot necessarily as well, but Vanilla Nomads can bring some pretty impressive guns to the table. However, they're pretty limited by SWIC pressure and list building. If you're bringing hackers and a guided strategy, that's bare minimum, costing you about 2.5 SWIC, but likely more. Due to the SWIC pressure, they've got very little redundancy in their list building, and their strong gunfighting units generally have a pretty high points cost, which also adds to that reduced redundancy, as you don't have the points or the SWIC to fit in backup guns. Vanilla Nomads and N4 emerged as an extremely strong faction over the edition. They gained a decent bit of power with the Fireteam's changes, where they could no longer be pinned down or shredded up by everyone having +3 ballistics in whatever link team. The list, as it was known, slowly developed over the edition and very much cemented itself, where the list was sort of the tagline for a meta Nomads list that emerged and proved to be very strong, and really focused on that toolbox approach, tag in front, supportive elements, and warbands, and really did quite well for itself. Vanilla Nomads changed very little, despite receiving new models towards the late end of N4, but we're now seeing those models potentially becoming more relevant in N5. But now that we understand where we're coming from, let's find out where we're going. Alright everybody, and here we are in Infinity Army 5 with Vanilla Nomads. The first huge change for Vanilla Nomads is the Fireteam's chart. You can see Vanilla Nomads gets 2 duos and a Haris, where previously the Haris was locked only if you were playing the Reinforcements extra, and the duos were a lot more limited in the units you could select to be duoed, and also very rarely didn't receive any bonus for that, where now there is the potential to receive duo bonuses. You can see we've got Nomad Fireteams 1, which is your duos, and Nomads Fireteams 2, which is duos and Harises. Having a brief look at here, you'll notice there's no keywords, which sort of locks what units can get access to a burst bonus. In Nomads Fireteam 1, that's Securitate, Kulaks, Mobile Regattas, Gecko, and the Morlocks. But in Nomads Fireteam 2, anyone here can get a burst bonus, provided that their team has at least 2 Mobile Regatta and 2 Kulaks. This is a pretty big change coming from N4 into N5, where a burst bonus wasn't something you could really get in a vanilla faction, but this has changed quite a bit, and I think especially will impact defense and offense. with the Mobile Regatta, you now have the option to, stand up a Mobile Regatta missile launcher on ARO, or get a Burst 3 heavy rocket launcher with the Kulak, which is a big change from how Vanilla Nomads previously used to be able to run. The second big change in Vanilla Nomads is a massive culling of the unit list. The unit list was cut maybe in half. You lost a lot of mercenaries that were sort of ubiquitous among the vanilla factions, like Armand and the Beast Hunter, motorized bounty hunters, that sort of thing. And you also lost a bit of the units that are now sort of locked to the sectorials, like Watabara or Kusanagi. So we're going to take a look at every unit here and discuss how they fit into the new ecosystem of Vanilla Nomads, and do a bit of a dive into the possible fire teams you can make with the units you have available. We'll start off with moderators from Bakunin, who were a pretty relevant unit in N4, and I think will continue to be a relevant unit in N5. Mainly, they were your cheapest lieutenant option, just having the 9-point lieutenant. You took a decoy, stuck them on opposite ends of your deployment zone, and you were golden. I still see that being, a relatively popular choice. You're not exactly spoiled for choice in Vanilla Nomads. I think there is a little bit more slot pressure going into N5 than there is in N4. But, yeah, look, I still think you're going to see the moderator lieutenant a fair amount of the time. The pitcher is decent, especially with how the range bands have changed. You've got a 50-50 shot at landing one out to 24, which could be a lot worse. I can foresee maybe coordinated ordering between a couple of these, but again, that's quite a lot of slots for not a very good pitcher. The moderator hacking device, it's okay. It's a very cheap hacker that still has 13 whip and 3 BTS. It's a decent backup hacking option, but you've got a lot better backup hackers, and you're likely only taking this one if you're under some real points pressure. Overall, I think you are going to see moderators, likely in the same capacity as last edition, but they've got some additional utility that I'm not sure how it'll fit into the ecosystem. Maybe it just won't at all, and I wouldn't be surprised, but it's there. Corregidor Aguasilis, I think, are going to continue to be irrelevant. There's nothing here that you particularly want, and I think they're more in here just to have every line troop in the gang. Then we've got Securitate, who are interesting on the basis that they're one of your duo options. And I think in Vanilla Nomads, you really want to focus on, what utility can I bring in a duo, and what utility can a Securitate bring to a duo. I think there's two main units that you might end up taking, being the Securitate Hacker with Combi Rifle for 18 points and half a Swick. Your Whip 14, and I think Warhorse is a very interesting skill where the Securitate can't be isolated. So the only way to shut it down is to get it with a Trinity or just shoot it in the head. Now, usually with the way you'll have your network set up, your opponent will be pretty disincentivized from just trying to stage dive a unit with a killer hacker. But the other interesting one is the boarding shotgun repeater, which, in a faction where your pitcher availability has been reduced a bit, where fast pandas aren't as efficient as the way pitchers are going necessarily, having a repeater you can yank up the board with any of these units is pretty nice. I could foresee you taking an Evader Spitfire engineer with a Tinbot, and, the hacker or the boarding shotgun seems pretty nice. I could also see you doing these with maybe a Gecko or a Gator, but you probably have better duo options if you're doing that. We'll get to the Gecko later, but I'm not sure it exactly has a place. You could also chuck it in with a Mobile Regatta in some respect, but I think you probably got better uses for those Mobile Regatta as well. I think you can get a burst bonus with these guys, but at only BS12, I don't think that really hits the point of competency to where you'd want to take something like a HMG or put a Feuerbach up on ARO. As we discussed briefly earlier, you've got a lot of Swick pressure in Nomads. So, while you might be happy to do that in other factions, where you don't necessarily care that much about your Swick, Nomads very much cares about its Swick. You've got some decent duo options in the Fireteam's charts. I think, unfortunately, Securitate are one of your weaker options. If you're taking the Hacker, maybe you're looking at something like Jazz instead, who has those better hacking programs and such. But I think the Boarding Shotgun Repeater is somewhat interesting. I think the Hacker is still somewhat interesting. Maybe if you've already taken a Jazz or something like that. But yeah, look, I think they're one of the weaker duo options. Do they have a place? Maybe. We'll have to see. Alright, next up, Puppet Masters, where the Mine Layer has lost its Swick cost. This is really nice, as the Swick cost of the Mine Layer meant it was usually pretty difficult to take it, but where having a very good defense sort of is becoming more important in N5, and a free Mine Layer is really nice. It's only 2 points over the extra. I'm thinking you'll see this one a fair bit. And you did see Puppet Tactica squads in N4 in Vanilla Nomads a decent amount of time. This was because they were zero Swick gunfighting option and were a way to cheat your slots, essentially. So you take of course, counter intel was valuable. So you take your Puppet Master, you take at least 2 puppets, probably the AP Marksman and the Boarding Shotgun, and the AP Marksman could serve as a pretty decent midfield brawler, while your Forward Observer could run around and get objectives. Extremely fast with 6-4 movement. They do have only 12 BS, but BS attack plus 1 burst usually meant you could push them over the line, maybe shoot through white noise. You had options to really make them shine. And yeah, all around a pretty fantastic unit that I think is going to continue to be fantastic. I think we're going to see Evo hackers become fairly popular to be able to push up to those higher echelons of gunfighting, where gunfighting has now been sort of relatively capped, sort of around 16, 17 is the highest, active BS you're going to get on a marksmanship unit, where you can give these puppet bots marksmanship as they are REM units. So really, that AP marksman rifle can become pretty deadly. You're also probably wanting to take some kind of drop troop in the new Vanilla Nomads. You've got something very nice coming up. So I can see you taking an Evo Hacker quite a bit at the time. Usually you've got an engineer around for your tag anyway. So I think Puppet Masters were excellent. They're going to continue to be excellent. And I think you're going to get an uptick in how often you see them in Vanilla Nomads. Just being able to really push that gunfighting. They act as a mini fire team with efficiencies with gunfighting and button pressing, and being able to push up those echelons of gunfighting while keeping the actual order generating unit safe in your deployment zone with a mine layer. Very cool. Alright, next up we got the Red Sky Mars Spider crew, and these are one of your options in the Nomads Fire Team 2. They've got a number of different profiles that basically break down to paramedic, engineer, or nothing. And when you've got nothing, you're picking between a Flash Pulse Panzerfaust or a Flash Pulse Grenades plus 1 burst, where these specialist profiles all just carry that Panzerfaust. I've got a pretty high opinion of the Mars Spiders. The CC attack plus 1 burst, climbing plus, martial arts level 1, that's enough to where you can assault, most units pretty easily that aren't CC specialists. I'm a big fan of this grenades plus 1 burst profile. Spec firing grenades, I think is a fantastic way to get around a problem you can't solve. And they're also just very good units in the sense of having a burst 2 heavy flamethrower is something relatively rare these days. Assault pistols, really good coming around a corner. So I can see you tacking this on to, maybe a rounder multi-marksman rifle just as a really good utility Harris. You can pull that Mars Spider up. It can press some buttons if you've taken either of the specialist profiles. Or it can just run up and start spiking stuff with that assault pistol, that heavy flamethrower, that really good close combat. And they're also a relatively cheap unit. And you do have use for engineers generally in Vanilla Nomads, you'd usually be taking probably a different kind of engineer, but these are a very good backup to have, and you're never gonna be kicking yourself for packing more engineers than you need. I can foresee the Mars Spider also going pretty well, tipping off maybe a pure Kulak duo or a pure Mobile Brigada duo, as it's very easy to sort of shoot off on its own, clear the path a little bit. It's happy to die, and these guys to sort of keep their duo bonus. I don't think it really fits with many of the other guys. Maybe if Wolfgang wants to drag around specialists, but you've probably got better stuff to do with that. So I quite like the Mars Spider. I think it fits in really well with some of the duo bonuses you have available, highlighting probably the Mobile Brigada, Kulak, and Rounder as your options there. Next up, we've got the Switchers Grouper, who are one of the new units out of Tunguska, and I'll save a bit of time here where generally I don't think they bring much value to Vanilla Nomads, outside of perhaps this Thunderbolt EM carbine profile, which is a pretty decent gunfighter for zero swick, but I don't know, at that point you're competing with a Papa Tactica, or even you're competing with a few different things, but it's nice to have that zero swick option there. They're quite strong at every range, and I'm pretty drawn to that EM grenades with a pretty excellent fizz at 14. And the enhanced profile is an all-around pretty useful unit with the move and the good close combat. The transformation whip is pretty interesting, but with a whip 13, it's going to happen more often than not. I think if these guys were linkable, that would probably push them over the edge a little bit more. But as it stands, I think this Thunderbolt profile is maybe viable, but I'm not sure if the other ones are going to see any table time. I'm not even fully convinced the Thunderbolt profile will see any table time either. Alright, the Casino Security Rounders. These guys are absolutely fantastic. The multi-marksman rifle is great for clearing a midfield. I had a game the other day where she shot up just 2 Gudon and a Liberto. Easy peasy, just discover, shoot. Really fantastic in that role. And the multi-marksman rifle's been a really nice buff. The security rounder has always been a unit who can reliably win gunfights with that marksmanship, but before just being a shock marksman, sometimes she would struggle to push that damage through. I think that multi goes a pretty nice way. Even if you're shooting at a unit with 2 armor, that's an effective +1 damage. That's really fantastic. And all of them picking up a boarding pistol really brings out that trading capability where, if you're really screwed, you can always just drop the template in a defensive capacity, cut off an attack run. Really great. You've also got the submachine gun hacker, who's really great in having a regular hacking device with a Trinity upgrade. This is, I'd say, one of the better hacking device sort of templates to have, where you have a really wide capability. And usually with that swick pressure and that slot pressure in a vanilla faction, it's great to be able to compress a unit like this. NCO is also quite good. You don't have a lot of units with NCO and Vanilla Nomads, and being able to use that Lieutenant Order, I think, is quite valuable. And it does have some really good duo options. Going with Perseus to give herself smoke, and a really good close combat killer. Same with Wolfgang, she can drag him around. We've discussed the Mars Spider, and I think the hacker could actually be quite good with a Mobile Brigada, who can put a really heavy tin bot over the Casino Security Rounder. She can use her NCO order to get them up the field. I think there's potentially something there. Could it end up being a bit too expensive? Yes, Mobile Brigada are quite expensive, but I do expect you will see the Casino Rounder in a decent amount of vanilla lists. She's also just quite good as a solo unit, but yeah, I think at minimum I'd be dragging around a Mars Spider just to have that specialist and close combat capability running around. She is very fragile, so you don't want to put her in situations she can't get herself out of, but she wins gunfights so handily and just has the right mix of skills to make a really effective unit for her cost. Daktari Campaign Doctors. these are potentially one of your better doctors in faction. You don't have many doctors in Vanilla Nomads, and I believe you even, yeah, you essentially lost all your good doctors. Um, Vanilla Nomads as a faction sort of has tended more towards the mechanized end of things anyway. I think it I think at Dactari, it's okay. I think you're just gonna make do with some potentially just with some paramedics, maybe not even that. Uh Vanilla Nomads has some really great engineers, paramedics and doctors not so much, and that might push you down the more mechanized route just in general. I mean, if you compare the Dactari to our next unit, the Clockmaker, who's your standard engineer, you see that big jump. So I don't know if the Dactaris are going to be worth it in a list. I don't know if you're taking a doctor generally, but I mean, just at Whip 13, no frills doctor, it's not incredibly attractive. What is incredibly attractive is the Bakunin Clockmakers, with Whip 15 and a Gizmo Kit +1 burst. Now, with the way the fire team changes have worked out and the special die, not giving you that second Gizmo Kit or Medipack, the Gizmo Kit +1 burst is actually a really nice thing to have. I believe the... Oh no, he's lost that. That's okay. The Gizmo Kit +1 burst is, really quite good. We've had a bit of time now to see how turrets and deployable cover sort of work. The armed turrets seem to have a decent bit of value to them. I don't think they're as oppressive as a lot of people are making them out to be. I've made decent use of some armed turrets recently, but that also very much showed me their limitations. But yeah, look, if you've got the spare points for it, for a 3-point upgrade, the armed turret's really nice. And the deployable cover isn't bad, giving you that extra 3 armor and cover. If you are taking a very specialized unit that's just dedicated to defense, I think the deployable cover is pretty decent for that extra survivability. There's a couple of pretty nice units in here that will appreciate that extra 3 armor a decent bit. And the way I've seen things sort of going is that, TR bots, standalone defensive units, are sort of going to get a bit more popular. But, as always, the issue is you don't get to start the game with this on the field. You need to set it up. So that's the limitation. Same with the armed turret. Alright, next up, the Tunguska Interventors. Whip 15 BTS 9 hackers. These guys are pretty excellent. The 18-point boarding shotgun fast panda. A bit of a spoiler alert, you've lost, so you've still got a heckler, but the heckler no longer has that fast panda. So if you've ever watched some of Rob Shepard's videos and his thoughts on Tunguska as a faction, he's not a huge fan of the heckler, which I don't necessarily agree with him on, but what I do agree with him on is that the Tunguska Interventor does a very good job of being a heckler as well, carrying Cyber Mask and a fast panda itself. It's also just generally a very deadly killer hacker that'll really disincentivize your opponent from jumping into your repeater net. So look, I think if you want to get a fast panda up, these guys can Cyber Mask, they can move decently well, do some hacking when they get there. I think, you might end up seeing the Interventor boarding shotgun killer hacker just on the basis that you no longer have the heckler, your picture availability is somewhat reduced, etc. Now the other side of the coin is the Interventor Hacking Device Plus profiles. These are pretty good in 2 respects. The first one is they're a pretty decent lieutenant choice. They're a good sort of synergizer lieutenant who can add to your network, make a good use of that lieutenant order where you don't necessarily have a huge amount of NCO. They're also more resilient than you might think. They can Cyber Mask with their own LT order pretty easily if you win the LT roll, which you're decently likely to, with quite a high whip. Also, I've had a few people try to hack my Interventor Lieutenant, and it's either not gone very well for them or just been a huge order sink where that BTS 9 makes a lot of difference. In your initial setup, if you're going second, it's also pretty easy to layer the Interventor with some killer hackers around it to really disincentivize someone getting a picture in, make it difficult for them to try and take that on And there's a lot of tactics you can do with the Intermentor that make them a very good and interesting lieutenant. I think next to the moderators, they're probably competing. They're the main competitor for that lieutenant slot. You can see my video on lieutenants in a bit more of a breakdown about what I mean about a synergizer lieutenant. But yeah, they're quite good. Whip 15 makes that white noise go down very reliably. I should have mentioned as well, if you're using the strategy of using the killer hacker to get a fast panda up, he's a really good button presser on the way as well, where a fair amount of missions have a hacking bonus. Next up, we've got the Tag Treba, who provides a tag comm, which is sort of like a rem driver, but for tags, with a pretty nice bonus all around. Dodge Fizz plus 3 is pretty good, bringing them most of them up to dodging on a 14, which is a massive improvement from 11. Gizmo Kit, Fizz plus 1, also pretty good, where you do have some really nice Gizmo Kits sort of around your faction. You've got 3 profiles here. Each one goes with a certain tag. The Gecko Pilot and Gator Pilot are somewhat unremarkable, but the Salamandra Pilot, just being a 10-point killer hacker, is really fantastic. It's a very low cost to get a very good skill set. Whether or not you're actually taking a tag, if you need that sort of extra killer hacker and don't have many points, it's a really great one to pull out. Generally, when I'm building Nomad lists, I'm taking 1 hacking device plus, 1 hacker who can do a bit of both, maybe a regular hacking device with a Trinity, and then a killer hacker sort of as its own, and that disincentivizes someone jumping into your network, and that gives you a lot of flexibility with your hacking. So I can absolutely see some scenarios where you've only got a certain amount of points left, and you just need to chuck in that 10-point killer hacker, because you don't have to take the tag. You can just take the Tag Treba itself, which I think is really cool and really valuable. Next up, Mary Problems. Mary was a bit of a black sheep in the previous edition, just due to her cost. You'd see her every now and again in Tunguska. Wouldn't really see her an incredible amount in vanilla lists, but she's very impressive, and now has the unique designation of being your best pitcher model. She's got a point of BS, which a few pitcher models have gotten, but she's the only one in Nomads. She's got a point of BS to reflect the loss of the +3 range band, and has those pitchers. Additionally, she's got forward deployment, which is really nice, and she's got a fantastic suite of hacking devices. Oblivion is probably the strongest regular hacking device program, so to have an additional burst on there is really valuable. I imagine a few of you have come across a burst 3 Oblivion before, and it's genuinely really nasty. Trinity AP is also a pretty big deal, and it is nice she does have the full killer hacking device to get access to Cybermask, to go through a minefield or the like. But having Trinity AP is a really big deal, because AP is what makes Oblivion such a heavy hitter. I've had Mary Problems melt Caronted Hackers in one turn. I've had her melt Azuras in one turn. It's a really scary program to have. And I think while you wouldn't necessarily see her in Vanilla Nomads in N4, in N5, I think just having that BS12 pitcher, having the points reduction, really nice. So I'd definitely take a second look at Mary if you weren't already on the Mary train. I think she's got quite a lot to give. Now, Zoe and Noelle. I always found Zoe very interesting as a way to compress your list slots. If you're planning to take a hacker and planning to take an engineer, a lot of the time I'd say, well, just squish them down into Zoe. She's got that very nice Gizmo Kit +1 burst, which is great. Whip 15 hacking device with 0 pain, which now works against all comms attacks, which is really cool. But Noelle herself, pretty decent in the sync version, having an Emarat, which is really good for defense, and a pitcher, and the FTO having that pitcher as well. It's a pretty hefty points cost for both of them. I would more stray towards just looking at grabbing the boarding shotgun Zoe on her own. I think you've probably got better options for pitchers, especially where, it's not a bit and kiss situation where Zoe has pitchers herself and can fling them off. But look, Pywell does have some good kit. I just think with only one wound, I don't know how far that's going to go. But yeah, I really do like Zoe just on her own. I think she sort of outclasses the Clockmaker if you're not looking at the Clockmaker for other things like armed turrets or deployable cover. If you're just taking the Clockmaker as a Clockmaker, I'd really be looking to upgrade that to Zoe and compress some slots. I think Zoe was fantastic, a little bit slept on in the previous edition, and I think she's even better now, where you do have more pressure. Alright, Jazz and Billy, they're still fantastic. Billy has picked up a heavy pistol, which is nice. Cybermines have gotten a bit better. Jazz picked up a boarding pistol, which is a template, which is a nice sort of defensive, okay, I'm dead here, whatever. Jazz is a mainstay. You'll usually take her as your primary hacker, just because she comes in so cheap, but is Whip 14 with so much utility, Hacking Device Plus with a Trinity, +1 damage. It's all you could ever really want in a hacker. Interestingly, she's your only linkable pitcher. You can't get a +1 burst on it, but you can use it to get a bit more efficiency. I'd really be looking at something like the Evader Spitfire, maybe even the Engineer profile to get that Tinbot on her. Or you could chuck her with some kind of Mobile Regatta, like a Mobile Regatta hacker, and those two could just run around together. Underneath that, Tinbot -6 is going to be incredibly difficult to crack. Or even just a Morlock if you plan to move them up. There's a lot you can do with Jazz, but I do think linking one with an Evader is probably more what I would be drawn to if I'm looking to link a Jazz to give her a Tinbot in some way. The Mobile Regatta is probably just a bit too expensive, but it is worth noting she is linkable, and sometimes you do have more slot pressure than points pressure. You'll end up just taking Jazz FTO just because you don't need Billy around and you need Billy's slot. She can just very easily sort of whack a duo somewhere, use some orders as kind of a, giving a half movement to another unit as they're moving out. Small efficiencies you can do with Jazz FTO, which are really nice. Alright, next up is Fiddler, who actually went up a point, and is in a bit of a strange state. So the Contender got a pretty big rework, so now it's T2 ammo, and has a Spitfire range band. So a Burst 3 Contender with BS12 actually isn't terrible, and we've seen that with Tawu as well. The main issue is with the Jackbots. Climbing Plus has gotten a lot worse, as it has with Fiddler as well. And Vulcan Shotguns have gotten worse as well, where they no longer have a template. A Vulcan Shotgun now is just AP continuous on a hit mode, and that's it. So the Jackbots have gotten a lot worse in that respect. They used to be very good guards for your deployment zone or etc. I don't think you would have really saw her in Vanilla Nomads and N4 anyway, and I don't think you're going to see her now, especially the way her profile's shaked out. And that's sort of been the same across the other factions I've reviewed, where she's lost a lot of utility with the changes to the Jackbot shotguns and a weird points increase. Workhorse are workhorse, they're great. Nothing much to say there, except for the Flash Pulse changes. Flash Pulses now only inflict 1 save per hit, but they get around Immunity Arm, which is a pretty big deal. And as a general trend, non-lethal arrows have gained a lot of stock just due to how resilient some attacking models have been at the release of N5. Next up is the Grenzer, who is one of your options in both the Duo and Harris fire teams. With the Grenzer, I'm basically just looking at the multi-sniper rifle profile. It's a bit of a shame you can't get 2, or else, the Fort Observer NCO would be nice to duo with the sniper rifle. There's also the missile launcher, but I think if you're really going for a pure duo bonus, you're better off with the marksmanship. And then the Red Fury, which is a fine gun, but I would really just be looking at the security rounder if you're looking at the Red Fury. So let's talk about the multi-sniper rifle. It's a mainstay in Tunguska, but only being burst 2, if not in a pure duo, is unreliable. It's not bad, it's just quite unreliable. And I wouldn't, you can't use it on ARO. It's too unreliable. And there's a couple ways to get a pure duo bonus. One is to put it with 2 kulaks, which maybe you do the heavy rocket launcher and the killer hacker and put the Grenzer up on ARO. That's a possibility. You could do something similar with the Mobile Regatta, but I think the Mobile Regatta is just too expensive at that point. So I could see you maybe doing the kulak. It is worth noting as well, marksmanship and visors have gotten a little worse with, albedo being in the game. It should be said, though, that, not every faction has albedo. It's sort of loosely sprinkled in a few factions. And even models who do have albedo, some of them aren't particularly good either. So it'll remain to be seen whether it's worth it to put it with some kulaks. But if it's not, I think there's no real reason to take a Grenzer otherwise. Next up, we've got the Sin Eater Observants, who've had a pretty decent points drop. And I think are actually models sort of worthy of being considered. I think the heavy machine gun and multi-sniper rifle are probably a bit too Swick heavy, especially in Vanilla Nomads, but I think the Mach 12 is quite interesting. In terms of a standalone unit, just on ARO, BS13, Mim-3, 3 burst with a Mach 12 is pretty lethal, and in the sort of, general thoughts around defending yourself, you sort of want to cut your opponent off at one of the last possible moments so that they've spent all the orders getting there and then sort of fail just at the end. So I can see you putting, let's say it's a room with an objective mission. I can see you positioning the Sin Eater sort of behind that big objective room so it can only really draw lines and lines to it sort of on the midline. And I think generally that's a strategy you should employ where you try to put that Sin Eater looking at the midline when units get to there. It cuts off your opponent's, usual heavy weapons like a heavy machine gun. Won't necessarily want to go all the way up there. And keeps the Sin Eater safe. The main thing this is competing with is the Thunderbolt TR-Bot, who's 7 points less, which is a genuine consideration. Has better range bands for going long range. And, can actually be used on the active turn. That being said, I think the Sin Eater Mach 12 deserves some testing, especially in a vanilla faction, where you don't have so much a linked defense, or necessarily as much defense as Nomads had in N4. So I'd keep an eye on that Mach 12. I think it's very much worth testing. The multi-sniper and the HMG, probably just too Swick intensive. Yeah. Alright, next up, the Kulak Payback unit, who are actually relatively important in the duo and Haris space. You've got a few different profiles, but the only ones you really need to pay attention to are the heavy rocket launcher and the killer hacker. The chain of command is just too expensive and Swick intensive to really be worth it. You've got like a brawler lieutenant in the Kriza, but it's probably not worth your time in Vanilla Nomads. You've also got a forward observer, which is it's okay, but just at 1 point extra, the killer hacker just does so much more, and the regular combi rifle plus on burst, sort of a weird holdover from when that had chain of command as well, I think. But you've got a 20-point heavy rocket launcher for just 1 Swick and 20 points. That's incredibly cheap, especially with the Swick cost. Usually the thing holding back a heavy rocket launcher is that it's very Swick intensive. But BS13 and Mimetism -3, that's taking you sort of above the level of base competency, where usually, even sort of towards the end of N4, it was, okay, maybe it's BS14's the base level of competency. Now I think it's been dragged back towards definitively, look, BS13 Nomads. That's the very base of competency. But BS13 with mimetism -3 puts you above that, can put your opponent at a bad face-to-face. I think such a cheap heavy rocket launcher, it's also a really impactful weapon to be shooting through white noise with. Even a heavy machine gun, sure, it's damage 15, burst 4, but each individual hit, if it's a high armored unit, might not do a whole lot. But a rocket launcher being continuous, stripping that cover bonus, I think is a pretty big deal. Pulsar +1 burst is a great tool. Pulsar's the big one as well. And a multi-pistol's nice to have, even though they've changed so that they're no longer anti-material. You used to be able to use this guy on anti-material missions, but alas, that can be the role of your Kulak killer hacking device with an upgrade carbonite. So this profile is really nice for a few reasons. The first one is he's a really easy killer hacker to put in and fill that killer hacker slot. Only 20 points, he's ridiculously cheap. And carbonite is a skill that, even though it's not as effective as, say Oblivion, it's still going to be a skill that will stop an opponent trying to push through a repeater net if your regular hackers are down. The AP submachine gun is, a fine weapon. It's not really why you're taking it. But the disco baller is quite a big deal. Being able to shoot out those Eclipse templates with BS13 up to 16 in a good range. These guys are fantastic to just put in a quick duo together, and I can foresee that being quite popular. A duo of these guys is only 1 SWIC and 40 points for an incredible amount of utility. In there you've got a BS13 heavy rocket launcher with MIM, you've got a killer hacker with a program that threatens heavy infantry, and you've got a disco baller, decharges. These guys could do a ton of classifieds as well as veteran troops. I think the Kulak's really worth your attention this edition, and there's probably been an effort to make them quite important. So in the Nomads Fire Team 1, the duo is fairly self-evident, but if we move down to the Harry space here, we talked a little bit about the Grenzer as kind of maybe an ARO piece, or first turn active if it survives long enough. I think a Mars Spider is really nice just to tack on the end. Wolfgang Amadeus, I think is really great. You can move up the Kulak team to sort of deliver him to the midfield and then let the wolf loose. He's very resilient. He's got a really nice glow up. I liked him before as well in Corregidor. But then there's Perseus, who I think brings a lot to the table, but probably not what the Kulak team is looking for, especially with the Disco Baller, where Perseus's main draw for me is his smoke and kind of close assault mimetism gunfighting. I think I'd rather take Wolfgang for that role just because of the speed and durability he has. But yeah, look, I think Wolfgang or a Mars Spider or a Grenzer, a really nice way to go to round out a Haris like this. Could even chuck in a Mobile Regatta Hacker if you're feeling wacky to give a really nice tin bot to the killer hacker. But yeah, there's a lot you can do here. Some of it's going to be more efficient than others. But yeah, I would wager the Mars Spider and Wolfgang are going to be good units to round out a Kulak team if you're going for that Harris. Next up, Hellcats. Hellcats have always been quite good. They were overshadowed in N4 by Carlotta, and to some extent Tomcats, but they fill a slightly different role. You've lost Carlotta, which is quite a big deal for Vanilla Nomads, and Tomcats, which now gives Hellcats some breathing room. The big thing, of course, is Fizz 12, Combat Jump +3, but if you got Nevo Hacker up, they're landing on an 18, which is the most reliable combat drop in the game. They've picked up Super Jump Jet Propulsion, which in essence means they move 6-6, and of course Super Jump is going to help you get around really well, and Jet Propulsion gives you a lot more flexibility with your movement. The big deal here for me is this Paramedic with deployable repeater, where your pitchers have gotten worse, as have your Fast Pandas, just by not having as many units with it. I think this deployable repeater is really valuable. You're going to be able to land that Hellcat exactly where you want it to be. He's got 3 deployable repeaters, so if he wants to, he can move, he can jump 6, drop, jump 6, drop, jump 6, drop, pepper some repeaters outside your opponent's deployment zone. And then look, he's BS-12 with a combi rifle. That's not bad if you have that in your opponent's deployment zone. He's also a specialist in his own right, so he can either push in, get some kills, run back, start getting objectives. There's a lot you can do with this Hellcat, and I'd highly recommend trying out this paramedic profile. And I think it really outshines the hacker profile just because you can get better hackers to hack through the deployable repeater, and you're not exposing the Hellcat to the risk that comes with being a hacker. The other unit in this space is the Meteor Zond, but I think the Meteor Zond fills a bit of a different niche, where it's more really looking to parachutist on due to its low fizz. So yeah, I think if you're looking to get that repeater in an exact spot with very little risk to the actual Hellcat, he can't be killer hacked or isolated like the Hellcat hacker or like the Meteor Zond, who's a remote itself. I think there's a lot of value in this Hellcat paramedic. Definitely not one to ignore, and I think definitely pulls you towards taking an Evo hacker. But even if you don't want to take an Evo hacker, he's combat jumping on a 15, which is quite reliable, and if he misses the jump, he still moves 6'6", fast enough to get back in the fight and do something useful. Next up, we've got the Zon Nordica unit, who's had its formatting absolutely garbled, but has had a little bit of a points decrease. I think basically you're still just interested in the hacker version and nothing else. Limited cover is a bit of a change. I think in some ways a buff, in some ways a nerf, depends how you used to run your Zon Nordica. But I think, with the added Swick pressure, it's a very good unit to just get out there and complete the mission. Also, being one of the few motorcycles who can quote-unquote dismount just by splitting into those two forms is quite valuable. I've had Zon Nauts do quite a lot in the games I've played with them in N5, and just getting that little points decrease and the points decreases around them really helps fit them into a list. They are filling up kind of a Swick slot for a hacker, but that's not tended to be an issue when I run them. I think they're pretty excellent and probably have a place now in N5 where they didn't really in N4, just as a very quick way to get a mission done, especially with hacker bonuses. Alright, next up we've got the Intruder, who has a new infiltration profile, which I think should just be completely ignored. An AP submachine gun is just too short range of a weapon to be making a difference. I would have really liked to see, I don't know, maybe a multi-rifle or even a multi-marksman rifle. But look, this heavy machine gun grenades profile, it's still your best unit for smoke shooting, and really your only unit for smoke shooting. And is going to be, I think it's going to be a bit of a mainstay, just with how reliable he's going to be. So much less sixth sense in the game means surprise attack is going to be really valuable. If you're shooting through smoke, they're not going to have a visor, so minus 12ing something with an Intruder is going to be pretty easy and reliable. And look, min minus 6 has always been a bit of a gear check, with guided getting a little bit worse. Maybe that pushes you more towards the Intruder as a way to solve those problems over the guided missiles. But look, I think he's quite good. The winning list in Interplanetaria 1 or 2 years ago had an Intruder in it. The multi-sniper is interesting as a defensive tool, but probably just costs too much overall. But yeah, I'd definitely be taking this Intruder heavy machine gun. I think it's fantastic. Okay, so Mobile Regatta have changed quite a bit, and I'm anticipating them being a bit more popular in vanilla, purely due to the flexibility they have in their fire teams. So they've picked up a 360 visor, they've lost a point of fizz, they've gained jump 8 inches, which is, I think, overall a bit of a downer. But then they've all picked up a boarding pistol +1 burst, which is a burst 2 template inactive, and with 5 armor, that's going to go a long way. You've got a few different profiles here. The standout for the Krigador faction is the Lieutenant Firewall Timbot -6, which I don't think really fits in as well here as a Lieutenant, just because you've got better options, but it's nice to have. I think what stands out to me is, of course, the Hacker with Timbot -6. This is a really nice one you could staple to the Gator, for example. Makes a really great duo with a Mobile Regatta Timbot -6. I could even see you, maybe stapling it to a Kriza Borak, if you choose to take a Kriza, which I don't know. I don't know if you will. We'll get to that later. You've also got the heavy machine gun there, which is, BS13, 5 dice. It's hitting that cusp of usability, and with 5 dice in a pure duo, it's going to be pretty nice. You've also got the missile launcher, who's a very reliable ARO piece. You can even use it in active by white noise shooting with a missile. Is actually genuinely decently reliable. And it's got a few different options. We just talked about those duos, but it's also got the Haris options, where you could very easily stick in something like a rounder hacker, if you did, say, HMG hacker, rounder hacker. A Mars Spider is a really good include as an engineer or a paramedic, because they do have a decent fizz. Even a Kulak killer hacker with that disco baller, really nice include into a team. But the Mobile Regatta's usability, I think, basically revolves around the use of that hacking device profile with that Timbot -6. And the heavy machine gun, it's fine, but unless you're taking the hacking device, I don't really see you taking it that much. I could even see you taking the hacking device, putting up a missile launcher on ARO, and then even pulling out a rounder as the main sort of active gun of the list, just where that heavy machine gun, is quite expensive. Next up, we've got the Taskmaster, who hasn't changed too much. He's picked up Fireteam Master, Morlocks, which sort of functions how if these two are together, that makes it regular, which is new for Vanilla. Regarding whether the Taskmaster is actually something I would be using, the heavy machine gun or the Red Fury are probably the ones you're looking at. You just don't have a high enough burst for the heavy rocket launcher, but they're quite expensive. They're more expensive than that Mobile Regatta heavy machine gun, who I said already is a decent bit expensive. You can staple a specialist to them because they're not a specialist already, but I don't know, at that point maybe you'd just rather have the Mobile Regatta. You can, link up a Morlock with it, but Morlocks are now only AVA2 in Vanilla, and you don't have another smoke-throwing warband. So your Morlocks are actually quite valuable. That's one thing I forgot to mention with the Zon Nautica. Having that smoke grenade launcher is actually kind of relevant, because your only smoke is the Zon Nautica, Perseus, and the Morlocks now. So it's quite limited compared to what you had available last edition. Okay, next up, the Evaders Tactical Group, who have a lot of utility. The main ones you're going to be looking at are the Engineer profiles and the AP Spitfire profiles. The AP Spitfire profiles are very reasonable for what they bring to the table. BS13, decent survivability, and some other skills to go along with that. And they've got the Engineer profiles, who go really well in a duo. I can see you duoing an Evader and a Gator to really good effect, where the Evader's multi-rifle can cover for the Gator pretty well in those bands. They can press buttons, keep that Engineer really close. If the tag and the Evader both get hacked, the Evader can engineer itself, then engineer the tag, making hacking the Gator, if it wasn't already not worth it with the new ECM Hacker -3, just really not worth someone's time, which is fantastic. You want to disincentivize plays like that, or sucker people into those plays and let them do it before they realize, hey, this isn't actually going very well for me. So I really like the Evader. That AP Spitfire Firewall -3 could go really nice with a Jazz. You could yank around a Morlock, just because he is already a specialist operative, even if you do only take, say the regular AP Spitfire without the engineering skills and all that. You could even take a Kulak killer hacker behind that firewall. There's a lot you can do with the Evader. I think it's really cool that he's duoable in Vanilla. As a Corregidor player myself, I'm actually somewhat jealous of what he can do in Vanilla that he can't do in Corregidor. Alright, next up is the Kriza Borak, who's had like a 10-point drop. It's a really big drop. He's also picked up BS attack -3, which is a big upgrade over his mimetism. Also ballistics attack +1 burst he had before, meaning his HMG is burst 5 and his Mach 12 is burst 4. Really nice. He does have some pretty nice duos. Like he could slap an Evader Engineer on there. Could slap, any number of things on there, even Jazz. And before in N4, he was sort of in an awkward spot where he was at a price point where he looked at it and went, I could probably just turn you into a tag. Tags have had a bit of a drop in points. Gator's about 74. Salamander's only 68, which is pretty insane. But there's now a very decent points drop between them and the Kriza, where I think he probably has a niche in a list that just doesn't have those extra points to spare. Also with tags, you have to take a lot of tag infrastructure, like a lot of engineers and that kind of thing. Not that that's difficult for Nomads to do. But what I'm getting at here is I think the Kriza probably has some kind of niche. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if he still didn't really see any play. He's still very slow, which I think holds him back quite a bit. The heavy machine gun, yes, it's burst 5, but it's just a heavy machine gun. The Mach 12 is an interesting profile. I enjoy using it casually, but I don't think it has legs, in a tournament list at all. But the Kriza is one to watch. It's interesting. Alright, now I've got the Tunguska Triggermen, who are a new profile and who are quite interesting. They're hackable heavy infantry, 2 wounds with 4 armor, 6 BTS, and they've got BS 13, min-3, and regeneration 13, which isn't actually a terrible number. They've got a few profiles. You've got 3 multi-sniper profiles and a forward-deploying K1 combi profile. I would not touch the K1 combi, especially with that fat base size. But you've either got... there's that multi-rifle. I wouldn't touch that either. You're just too fat to really be pressing up that way. But you've got the multi-sniper Emerant, BS attack +1 burst, or you've got the multi-sniper Emerant Neurocynetics. I think the +1 burst multi-sniper, I might just be taking the Kriza Borak instead of that, with such a close points cost, and there is a bit more utility to the Kriza being able to duo, I think. But the Neurocynetics multi-sniper is quite interesting, just as a very hard stopgap. Mim -3, BS 13, 2 full burst back, with that armor and those wounds. Pretty effective. I've got one on the table, and he survived quite a few volleys from... he took up a whole small group order pool from a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, which, I found relatively impressive. He does cost a lot of points, though, and like we talked about with the Sin Eater, 1.5 Swick is quite a lot of Swick for just a dedicated ARO piece. I think it really just depends how defense heavy the meta shakes out, because we're looking kind of the recent trend has been defense is now just as important, or even maybe a bit more important, as offense. And if that trend continues, I could see the Triggerman being decently popular. Alright, now on to Sally. She lost Tack Aware, gained NCO, which is whatever. It's a slight nerf. But 68 points is ridiculously cheap for the Salamandra. Full 3 wounds, 8 armor, 9 BTS, BS 14, hyper rapid magnetic cannon. I still think the Salamandra is probably going to be a staple of Nomad lists, just because of how cheap it is. I can't really say much more. It's just excellent. Sub 70 points is insane. Then we've got the Gecko, who's had a bit of a profile rework. It's got a multi-marksman rifle and a Mach 12. They both cost 1 Swick, which is a bit of a shame now. And they've got BS attack +1 burst. Still got Tack Aware, all that sort of thing. But yeah, look, I don't really see a place for it, especially in vanilla. Like, it's a Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd rather, if you're taking the Mach 12 or the multi-marksman, I think he'd be better off just taking the Kriza, to be frank. It's going to be a better shot. It's going to be similar survivability. And I just don't think the Gecko does enough to get itself out there. You're never going to pure Jiro these. That's frankly ridiculous. And costing a whole Swick on both weapons is pretty rough. So yeah, look, I don't think the Gecko's got any legs, any legs at all, which is quite a shame. It's just too expensive. Alright, now the Gator, who stayed basically the same, except now he's picked up ECM Hacker -3. So any incoming hack attempts are going to start at a -3. So if you slap that Mobile Regatta Timbot, someone's at a -9 to hack him, which is really nice. It's going to be interesting to see. So the Gator's excellent. I'll get that out of the way. He's a really, really good tag. Mind Dispenser sets up a lot of really interesting plays. But it'll be interesting to see what's favored between the Salamandra and the Gator. They were both relatively useful tags in N4. I think the Sally sort of just beat out the Gator generally. But the linkability of the Gator, I think, gives it a little bit of extra spice. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Gator kind of pulls up back to that equal position. And I do think it's an equal position. The Sally has, its cheapness and its brutal weapon going on. But the Gator, it does cost a bit more, costs less Swick, and has a bit more of that tech. Can have a duo for some added spice. I think there's a lot going on with both the Gecko and the Sally. I think they're both excellent. And look, generally, when you're making a Vanilla Nomads list, you need a big gun. You usually start looking at the Sally or the Gator as sort of the first port of call when list building, if you're doing a very typical Vanilla Nomads list. Maybe take a Cruiser if you're going a different direction, or, just keep it to the squishier one wound stuff. But Gator's really good. Salamandra's really good. I would expect to see one in most Vanilla Nomad lists, partially as a holdover from the old meta, but very much because they're both very cool units. Stemplerzond has picked up Tactical Awareness. He's not linkable, unfortunately, so you can't really make good use of that, so I don't think you'll see it. What I think you will see, however, is the new Reaction Zond Thunderbolt +1 Burst. I've played against these a few times on the table, and I said in my videos before I've, come across them and used them myself, that I wasn't sure if it would displace the HMG. I think after playing with it, it's totally displaced the HMG. The range bands are extremely valuable, because the Thunderbolt, it's got Feuerbach range bands, so after the +3 it zeros, so you can shove that thing way back in your DZ. I've seen it really heckle some people for a lot longer than I thought it would. It also being usable in the active turn, you can give it marksmanship, that kind of puts it over some of the other neurocynetics pieces. But yeah, it's quite a good unit. Costing 0 Swick is a huge deal as well, and I think an especially big deal in Nomads. A faction like Combined Army might still stick with that HMG, just because it's still got that mimetism and all that sort of stuff, but without that, I think the Reaction Zond Thunderbolt is probably the way to go. And, if you're taking a tag, if you've got engineering support, or if you're taking a Hellcat, so you've got that Evo hacker, I think that Thunderbolt's really valuable, and I think you're going to see it in quite a lot of lists, maybe even the majority of Vanilla Nomad lists. Maybe that's going too far, who knows. Alright, Vertigo Zond. So this is maybe a good space to talk about the changes to Guided. Spotlight is now a burst 2 inactive, but they get a save. And this makes you worse reactively spotlighting, and relatively equal at active turn spotlighting as you would have been in the previous edition. I have had some issues when I've tried to spotlight things, like a Prime in Decap or something like that, where the spotlighting save has made a difference. The biggest difference is reset is now face-to-face. This makes the consequences of failing that missile launch or getting resetted out of it really catastrophic, because you then have to spend another order respotlighting, which could fail, and then another order sending a missile. So I've played maybe 5 or so games now, with either side using a missile bot, and the changes are they're substantial. Now pitchers are somewhat easier to land, depending on who you are. I think Vanilla Nomads get hurt in the pitcher game just because they don't have access to that burst 2. And the range bands now matter. So you're shooting at a 15 if you're in a 0 range band. So trying to line it up to get that 18 is important. And mathematically, it's pretty important as well. It boosts your chances. I think I did the calculations around 15 to 20% if you're in the 18 versus the 15. So it's a pretty big deal. So guided has changed. Do I think it's going to get removed from the Nomad toolbox? No. I think it's still quite good, still has its uses. It's just not as reliable as it used to be, which is fine. And that just means your other tools are going to see a bit more play. Stuff like the Intruder to deal with heavy min pieces. It just means it's another tool in the box rather than the definition of a list. Alright, the Meteor Zond. Big fan of this guy. Picked up ECM Hacker -3. He's picked up Super Jump Jet Propulsion as well, which is really nice. Light Shotgun and EM Carbine. The EM Carbine's a really interesting weapon, especially if you're coming on in someone's back arc. Can brick a tag pretty easy. But, the boarding shotgun being cheaper, not going to fault you for that. I think these guys, along with the Hellcats, could end up being the new favored way to get repeaters down on high-value targets. I was a big fan of the Meteor Zond before the change to N5. And I think, I've had them on the table in N5. They're still fantastic. And they're just so quick now with that super jump. They were fast before, moved 6-4. But, they're great at running objectives. They're great at getting a repeater up. They can even assassinate some targets, depending on what's going on. Really love the Meteor Zonds. Transductor Zonds have changed the same. We discussed a bit about the Flash Pulse changes. Still really good in Vanilla Nomads just to have those repeaters. And Flash Pulses are great. Alright, the Cyclone next to Mary is your best pitcher. In Corregidor, I'm a fan of the Feuerbach, but really in Vanilla Nomads, you're only looking at that Spitfire. It is a cheaper Spitfire, which is nice. And I can see you, maybe running an Evo bot with it. But because that X-Visor pitcher it's decently valuable. I just don't know if it's going to get pushed out by other options. You wouldn't see it in a Vanilla N4 list just because you had better options for getting your pitchers down. Those options have now reduced, which means, okay, water level's gone down. Is the Cyclone enough? But at the same time, you've also picked up things like the Hellcat, or Mary Problems has picked up a point of ballistics. I think the Cyclone's worth testing, especially as Evo bots and Evo hackers, I think, are sort of going to increase in potential and increase in viability. Not that they weren't viable before. They were great before. But, you shooting at someone with BS-15 with marksmanship, that now represents the upper echelon of gunfighting kind of in the game as a whole. So I think the Cyclone's worth testing. I think he's worth testing. Next, the Lunicod, who's had quite a lot of changes. First up is movement. 8-2 is a massive change on the movement, and that's really incredibly fast. Most impactfully, I think forward deployment +4 is really something he needed. Would have liked it if it was +8, but +4 is fine. And Mine Layer with those crazy koalas. He's picked up heavy shotgun, either a heavy flamethrower and an emitter, or a thunderbolt and an emitter. Now, emitters have gotten quite a lot better. They're now Thunderbolt range-band weapons, burst 2 that inflict EM saves, which are really valuable to stop an enemy attack run. Just being burst 2, though, does hold you back, especially because you can't go suppressive with them or anything like that. And that feels a bit strange for me with the Lunicod, where I can't really see a great use for that emitter. The same issue goes for the Thunderbolt, where I'd much rather be taking that reaction Zond for a Thunderbolt if I'm wanting one. But I do somewhat like the heavy shotgun, heavy flamethrower combination. As we'll see a little later, we only have AVA 1 Moraines now, which kind of leaves a gap in that repeater game. And a heavy shotgun, heavy flamethrower is going to be pretty difficult for someone to walk past, especially if there's a crazy Qualler in the picture as well. You can even place that crazy Qualler a bit back to force someone to go around the corner you're on to engage it. There's a lot you can do with the Lunicard, but 25 points is still a substantial price tag, especially as we've seen a lot of other prices go down. I do think that this fills a niche, though, and a niche left by things like the Hecklers, where you can't take the Jammer, and AVA-1 Morans. I think there is a niche. I think defense is becoming more important. It's just going to be whether or not that 25-point price tag ends up being a make or break. Soviet Zone is still the same. Baggage has changed, though. Now, anyone within 8 inches of a baggage bot gets a free reload during the States phase, which has proved really valuable and enabled, your unreliable pitchers to sort of have extra cracks. It makes disposable defenses, such as Panzerfaust or Flammenspeer. It makes them really good. You can even reload as an ARO, which is interesting. Maybe if you had a 2-wound disposable unit, like a Zuyong or something like that. There's not really that in Corregidor, unless you're taking a Gecko, but I wouldn't be sticking that out on Arrow anyway. But yeah, there's a lot going on with Evo hackers and baggage that I think is really cool, and I've discussed that a bit more with the other units. But yeah, look, I think taking Evo hacking devices and lists is generally going to become more popular. Quite like it. Alright, the Vostok has split into 2 profiles, a repeater +1 damage profile, and then for 5 points less, a non-repeater Mach 12. I think these guys just don't really get over the cusp in terms of what they want to do. I mean, BS12 MIM 6 is nice, but they are quite expensive. I'd probably just be tempted to take a puppet team, especially where the Vostok, it can't duo or fire team with anything. Maybe if it could, that would be some more points in its favor. But just as a solo piece running around, I think I'd probably rather take a puppet, just because of that specialist capability. But, it's still going to be a decent piece. MIM 6, marksmanship's going to always be a pretty brutal combo. Only Burst 3, which, you're paying a lot for a Burst 3 model, but it's probably got a very good chance of winning those face-to-face rolls. I like the repeater quite a bit because you can put up white noise through it, you can evo it from anywhere on the board, but the 5 points drop is pretty nice on the FTO version. I don't know if these guys are going to hit the table. My guess is probably not so much, but yeah, bleh, I'll give you that. Alright, the Heckler, a bit of a fall from grace, in that they've lost the quote-unquote good profile, which is the Jammer Fast Panda, and you're left with a boarding shotgun Emerat, a Red Fury, or a combi rifle Cybermine with killer hacking device. The killer hacker is pretty If you want to take a camouflage killer hacker, I'd really just be looking at the Zero. The Red Fury, just go get the Rounder, and the Heckler Emerat as a defensive tool, then yeah, I just go to the Lunicard, I think. So yeah, I really doubt you're going to see any Hecklers in any lists. The Emerat's fine as a defensive tool, but you've just got better things to do with 20 points in a slot. Zeros. Still pretty lean and mean. I think the killer hacker, really good. Even the regular hacker can be a surprise sometimes. Mine layer is interesting, especially with the Paramine. As we talked about non-lethals being pretty valuable. It'd be interesting. It'd be hard to not be obvious about the mine layer. Maybe you could try and bluff something. I'm not sure what you would do, though. But yeah, look, I'm very drawn to the hacker, killer hacker, and mine layer. Even the forward observer to catch people out with some forward observes. Pretty cool. Zeros have always been a nice lean profile that gets the job done. And I think there's less competition now than there was in N4. So yeah, I'd keep an eye on them. Spectres, they've had that whole rework with the reinforcement update, but I think they're just still way too expensive to do much. Yeah, I mean, look, Whip 14's something, Surprise Attack is something, but it's just too many points, and you've got much better hackers. Now Morans, they've gone down a point, but they're only AVA 1 now, and the boarding shotgun no longer has a template of any kind. Picked up an extra burst on the flash pulse, but that's whatever. Vanilla lists really revolved around the Moran in N4. And they were sort of the midfield boogeyman in everyone's minds. And there was sort of a list check you had to do of, okay, but what happens if I go up against a list with 2 Morans? Can my list handle that? How do I solve for that? And being such big boogeymen really made a lasting impression on what surrounded Vanilla Nomads, what Vanilla Nomads is. But now they're only AVA 1. You're still going to take your 1 Moran every game. You're going to have to be more careful about where you put it now. And it does leave a gap in your defense to be filled by maybe some new units and some of the reworked stuff like a Lunicod or something similar. They're still excellent. I would still take one in every list. Fantastic stuff. Alright, now the Morlock group, who's had a big hit to availability, and you've generally had a big hit to your smoke. So, smoke is now worse. You don't get a +3 range band when chucking it, and the availability of models who can throw smoke for you is really reduced. They're still quite good in CC. Metachemistry's a really good chart, and they've kept all of their profiles with one big change, which is the smoke grenade launcher costs you 0 SWIC, and I think this is really something to pay attention to. So you can see here we've got a Morlock duo, which, if you're throwing smoke grenades 2-on-13s, that goes from being so-so to actually very reliable, but the issue is you're stuck in one part of the board with that duo. The smoke grenade launcher gives you a relatively equally reliable smoke shot to the other side of your board, which isn't going to have a Morlock group in it if you duo them. So I think, if you want to get ahead of things, I think taking a Morlock assault pistol or EMCC weapon, duoing that with a... even the combi rifle sort of fulfills the assault pistol's role, which I know is pretty popular among some people. So take the Morlock EMCC weapon, duo that with the smoke grenade launcher. I think that's going to be a very early, sort of effective fire team for covering your bases with smoke, especially where it's been so heavily reduced. But I really like the Morlock group. I think I would expect to see 2 in every list. Next, the Bakunin Ubefall Commando. She's gotten a bit worse in CC just with the changes there, and you no longer have the option on how many pups to take. Pups are still dodging on 19, still 6-4. Climbing Plus has gotten a bit worse, but the Chimera is still fantastic. I think, Viral has gotten a little bit worse as well, but they're still fantastic. I would still take one in most lists, just as fantastic close assault, especially where your cheap close assault units, you've just got a bit less of them now. Alright, now we've got Perseus with BS attack +1 burst, which is really nice. It means those smoke grenades are natively burst 2, which is pretty important, and that multi-rifle is natively burst 4, which is really cool. Martial Arts level 3 is a pretty important martial arts level. That's when you gain the extra die, and no wound incapacitation. Really nice. You still don't have shock immune though, but you're seeing less shock generally in the game. I'd probably be taking the multi-rifle over the breaker combi rifle. Additionally, BS attack +1 burst, that's affecting that nanopulsar. I think Perseus, he's quite excellent, but the question really is, what do you chuck him in with? Brigada heavy machine gun he could go with pretty easily. Same with a Taskmaster machine gun, or even a Kriza Borak. The issue really is is that he's not a specialist operative, so that more leads you to want to take him in some kind of hurry situation, where maybe you go Kulak Heavy Rocket Launcher, Perseus, and then a Killer Hacker, or even Mo Brigada HMG, Perseus, and a Mars Spider. That's pretty nice. And look, he's a decent wad of points, but I do think he brings quite a lot to the table. Burst 2 smoke grenades especially, not to be sniffed at. But a very good model. Super Jump as well is quite nice. He's not going to be able to utilize that so much in fire teams, as there isn't really another unit here with Super Jump in the fire teams charts. But we'll move on to Wolfgang now, who's at a really nice glow up. He's moving 6-2, which is quite good. He's got Immunity Arm, which is really great on a multi-wound model. But the big thing is he's picked up BS Attack Continuous Damage. So that +1 damage multi-rifle is continuous, and that multi-rifle is still AP, and that Chain Colt is also continuous as well. He's still a monster in close combat. Again, that Martial Arts 3 is the important number. Berserk is face-to-face now as well, and I think Wolfgang is one of the models who's actually very happy about that. He can Berserk in at a +6 on 2 dice when you factor in his Martial Arts and other bonuses, and then he can use his Para-CC weapon to put his opponent at -6, and that's going to swing basically anyone. So he's very, very reliable in that way. He used the same amount of points as Perseus, so it's going to be interesting to see who wins out between Perseus and Wolfie. I think they serve different purposes though. Wolfgang is really a hunter-killer, where Perseus is really more in that role of smoke grenades, providing support, midfield brawling, moving up, where Wolfgang's just sort of a more like full send model, who you can really put the fear. You can really give stuff fear. Last up, we got the Go Pod, who's the vehicle for Nomads. Move 8-2, but it has jump 8 inches and super jump, which means it can just go 8-8, basically. So it's got no cover, which is a bit of a downer, but it's got Mim 3 and BS Attack -3. So you're usually imposing that -6. And you've got BS Attack +1 burst natively. So there's 2 profiles here. There's a multi-rifle emitter with the GoBot. And the GoBot's quite nice in that it has a flash pulse and chain colt, so it can set up forks really easily. But you've got the emitter and the multi-rifle, which is a fine profile. You can't really push through some targets with the emitter though, so that's a challenge. But the one for me is the BS Attack -1 SR Heavy Rocket Launcher AP Submachine Gun. We've already seen with models like the Wrecker just how effective, bonus damage heavy rocket launchers can be. The AP Submachine Gun's a nice tool, especially with 2 wounds. You're usually happy to push in after you've established hacking dominance. And it's such a quick model. It really makes good use of the orders you spend on it, similar to, say, the Zonnot, where, your slots are important, your orders are important, especially in a vanilla faction. You want things to be able to get done as quick as possible, and the GoPod's just such a rapid unit who can really make an impact with very few orders, who I quite like. So where do I see Vanilla Nomads going? I think they've definitely taken a step back in terms of power level, just from suffering in the midfield with the Moran, suffering a bit with their smoke, and then losing some options around those places. I think the fire teams are a new interesting direction that are, I'm going to have a lot of fun exploring. And I can definitely see you filling up your duo and Harris slots pretty well. I think the Kulak duo has got a lot of teeth to it. I would really be expecting to see Morlock duos in most lists, I say. And then that leaves a lot of room for something like a Mobile Brigada with a Wolfgang or a Mars Spider attached, or, even a Gator, do it with an Evader. I could see you doing something like, a Morlock duo, a Gator duo, and then just making a Kulak duo with a Mars Spider on the back to cheat yourself into that third duo with a Harris. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on with Vanilla Nomads, but I'm very keen to hear what you guys think in the comments, because this is a step back for Vanilla Nomads, and I think it's one of those factions where you're going to have to rewire how you play them. There and list build for them. Similar to military orders, who's had a lot of big changes as well. You know, you've got factions like O12 and Tunguska who haven't really fundamentally changed how you want to build a list or shape your tactics. But I think in line with military orders, Vanilla Nomads is one of those factions where you are going to have to change how you play and how you list build. I don't think they're weak by any stretch of the imagination. I still think they're quite good, just not that S tier that they used to be. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this little romp through Vanilla Nomads. Please like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.